My name is Sarah Carpenter from Maple Grove Senior High, Spanish teacher. And how I've integrated the rubrics in the practice is between last year and this year, it was just a little changes, coinciding with the rubric verbiage change and things like that. But I think in general, what it's allowed us to do is to be more targeted with our approach to what we're actually asking the kids to do. It's allowed us to really focus in on the very specific, what is it that I need them to know, which was a question that in a world language class has been kind of vague over the, kind of before we shifted to this, because there's so many different things, so many different aspects, and this has allowed us to really target specific areas. And for in terms of the rubric, it's been nice to have the flexibility to keep the level of learning as the major focus, like the 4-3-2-1 is the major focus of this, and kind of adapt the rubric how we see fit for a different assignment. So for a speaking assignment, we can be quite a bit more specific in many different areas and use an average overall. And then for more targeted grammar skills or grammar points or listening skills, we can kind of be a little more flexible with what the rubric looks like, but always keeping in mind what the 4 is, what the 3 is, what the 2 is, what the 1 is. What's also been really nice about using the 4-3-2-1 is because we have an ideal of what we want each one to look like, each test can be modified based on what we're having them do. So if we have a traditional cut score type thing for the 4-3-2-1, it really varies based on what each task, or what task they're assigned to do. So we can adjust what the cut score is. So sometimes the cut scores can be more traditional and more in line with the percentage ideal, more or less, but a lot of times we can really just say, no, on this assignment, in order to be exceptional or in order to be at that excellent accuracy, this is what you have to do, and this is a 3 and this is a 2, and we can really kind of adjust it to each assignment. And the cut scores can vary based on what it is we're having them do, or if we give them the same test, the cut scores can change based on their level of learning throughout the year. So we could give them feedback based on something at the beginning of the year and test them at the end, because Spanish is so cyclical that we could test them at the end on the same thing, but the cut scores could be different based on where their exceptional is at that point or their proficient is at that point. What we've also done, especially in some of our levels, is we've really simplified it to a couple of rubrics that we'll use throughout the entire year on same task-based or same skill-based things. So like their speaking rubric, they have a similar speaking rubric that they use throughout the year, so the students really get comfortable and familiar with what it is that we're expecting throughout the year. What they will be doing to show their level of knowledge might change, the actual task or the assignment itself, but the way they'll be assessed on it is always the same. For cut score communication to students, it depends on what the task is. Sometimes if it seems fit, we'll talk about the cut scores and how we developed them and why we came up with the limits that we did as we're describing the rubric before the assessment. So, like the week before, we'll walk them through the rubric and say, this is your cut score and this is why we determined it to be this, and this is where the rationale behind the cut.
Hi, I'm Janae Fazal, and I am a visual arts teacher here at Osseo Junior High. This year has been a great pivotal year for me personally with the new grading. I've really enjoyed having the new rubrics, the template that was provided by the district with the descriptors and the consistent language that's being used across the district. I am finding that what's working really well for me with this new language and the descriptors is my students then can see the information as I put it up on the overhead, and then they have the ability to see where they're going to fall within a 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and looking at the requirements and what they need to do to achieve that particular standard. I love having all of that on one template because all the information is there for them. What my students will also be aware of is that when we are talking about the visual arts reporting standards, is I have posters in the classroom and we refer to those as well. I also provide lots of visuals so they can see students who've achieved a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0 with no evidence. But this is art, so we don't get many zeros. They really do want to do a really good job, and if they can see what other students have successfully been able to do, they pretty much know where they will fall within that standard, and then also just getting the feedback that they need that's so important. Because in visual arts, I do rely a lot on visual assessment, which for me last year was really challenging. If I didn't know specifically what I was looking for visually in their summative projects specifically, knowing where I wanted them to go. My biggest challenge last year with the grading was I couldn't see where I needed my students to go. And I'm seeing that so clearly now. Again, the rubric has been offered me the opportunity to plug the information in that I needed. So I've been able to access the cut and paste, get that in there. I can start off with the 3, work the way down or up on the rubric, which has been so helpful. And of course, with the visual arts reporting standards, we also have our descriptors that fill in really nicely as well with the standard directly in there. That has been so beneficial. Yes, teaching 3 grade levels, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade is challenging, especially when you look at the number of students we have, the number of formative assessments, and the summative assessments. It seemed like a really big mountain to get over, but this year, for some odd reason, I know it's been because of the rubric and the descriptors being a little bit more aligned. It's made it less work for me. I mean, I still have my work to do, but now I have a template and I'm able to plug in that information. And as I go for each unit, every week, as I'm updating and making any changes, I'm able to just go ahead and come up with the new summative rubric, which has worked really, really well. So it's going really extremely well. Like I said, I felt last year I was treading a lot of water. This year it's a little more smooth sailing. It's a big, big improvement.
I'm Todd Martin from Maple Grove Senior High. When I'm not doing amazing things in biology or chemistry, I'm out fishing brine share. A couple years ago, when I started taking over HP biology here at the high school level, the question that I always had was what really defines an A student? Like what makes a student be that exemplary academic kid? The answer that I came up with a couple years ago was that usually on a test, there's ways to tell, there's questions on there, and there's ways to tell whether or not a student really gets the idea or the general focus of the unit. So ultimately, there'd be a 50-point multiple choice test or something like that. And the kids that were A students were the ones who were consistently getting the same ones right, and the kids who weren't A students were the ones that were getting those wrong. And so what I tried to do was I tried to create tests then after that that would really focus in on what an A-level question was, what a B-level question was, what a C-level question was, and so on. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. And then when I started switching over, when our district went to equal interval grading, it became more a measure of what levels of understanding fit into the different tiers of grades. And so once I was able to sit down and really think about that, all I did was I aligned those different levels of scores of the old measure was the 1.5s, 2.5s, 3.5s, and 4s. I aligned those to levels of Bloom's taxonomy and just basically built tiered tests from that. So in the past, I would give multiple choice questions, matching questions, etc. And those test questions typically fell in the range of 1 to 2 as far as a level of thinking. And what I started having to do was rearranging the levels of thought on my tests into shorter, more abbreviated versions of 1s, 2s, and then adding on layers of 3s and then 4s. And so that led to the tiered tests that I have now. Probably the coolest thing about doing these tiered tests is that after about the first 10, 15 minutes, throughout my classroom, I'll get a whole bunch of kids going, oh, and they're putting it together. They finally get that moment. And it's been a really cool transition for me, watching students go from where they are uncomfortable for a little while academically to kind of having a moment where they put all the information together and they're actually learning while they're taking the test. And to me, that's been a real positive offshoot of this. The tests are certainly challenges. They're very difficult to write. But at the same time, most of my students come back with, they really appreciate the dialed-in nature of, yeah, if all I really need to show that I know how to do is this level, then they do that. And they really can focus in and show me in very quick ways what level of understanding they have on a test. Like a level 4 on this year's biochem test, this is on the review sheet for the kids, so it doesn't really give away anything to them, but it gets them to understand that you have to have kind of a wide degree of information at your hands that you understand. So like this one talks about, you'll be given a short description of a macromolecule with an accompanying set of lab data to evaluate. With this information, you'll be asked to create a new lab to test your assumptions. And then finally, you'll be asked to predict the factors that can possibly influence the outcome of your lab. So they have to take something that they really haven't seen before, make sense of it at a primary and secondary and tier 3 level, and then be able to create a lab out of that to be able to show that they understand everything. To me, it's wide open, which makes it difficult to really have a lockdown rubric for, or a lockdown piece of information for. It used to be easy to grade things because you could take, they got 37 out of 50 on the test, and that used to be a real easy piece. And now it's much more subjective as far as when the student comes up with their final answer, does their final answer show or exemplify that they really understand this to a really high degree level? And that's been a transition for me, and I've had to let go of the point piece. But it's been a very liberating piece for me as far as it no longer matters if you got 7 out of 12 or 8 out of 12, because in the old formats, those things really mattered. Now what really matters is what level of understanding that you actually have. When a kid hands in a level 4, and I can look at it and take a few minutes to read through their what they've created, I can get a very good approximation of where they're at academically with that piece without having points per se. So I wanted to make it kind of user-friendly to the point where I felt pretty confident that you couldn't possibly accomplish this level of stuff without having a really good idea of what these things were. And so that's where that kind of tiered idea came from, for me at least. And it really reduced the amount of correcting then. It reduced the amount of time that I really had to focus on everything, because kind of like I said before, it used to be where I gave a 60-point test, and it was always the same 4 or 5 questions that made the difference between a B and an A for a lot of kids. It was those, there was always those A questions that kids either did really well on or didn't know at all, and that really made the difference between the A's and the B's a lot of the time. Now I've taken my test and I've really hyper-focused them on, this is an A-level question. If you can do this, you get an A. And I'm assuming then, because of the way that it's structured, there's no way that you can do this without having the basic understanding of the prior